Once the organised camping fell through because of pressure from neighbours, a decision was made then that we'd all camp here. Musgrave Park has traditionally been a place where black people congregate. We were here as an action group to promote our campaign, and our priorities were survival in the camp and statements on the street, political statements that would promote awareness and discussion about the land rights struggle, a struggle we've been waging for 200 years, and about our struggle for our basic human rights.
Just remember, all you Aboriginal and island people, that same sun has shone on the Aboriginal and island people in this country for 50,000 years, and it's still shining on us. May the sun shine a long, long time. You see the colours of the flag? That red, that black, that yellow? The black stands for the people and the colour of our skin, and the red is for our land and the blood that has been shed in our struggle and is still being shed. And that yellow is for the life-giving force, the sun, that unites the people and the land. And we will never be separated, the land from the people, as long as there is a sun to shine. So let the sun shine.
I'd like to first of all thank all of our black brothers and sisters from Queensland for letting us all come and visit them on their land. Jobajogi Peterson, I don't thank you simply because you seem to be labouring, use a word, under a misapprehension that white people discovered this country. For Jobajogi Peterson, for Russ Hens, for all the National Party people in Queensland, and for all those cubs in Queensland who seem to think that Captain Cook discovered Australia, I'm here to tell you it's not true. This country was discovered, explored, and settled by Aboriginal people. Yeah. Our people have been here for something like 100,000 years. And people like Jobajogi Peterson and his ilk forget that too easily. There are too many white people in this society today who are trying to suggest that Aboriginal people are seeking something that they're not entitled to. Well, let me tell you, Jobajogi Peterson and all your mates, before any white man ever set foot on this country, something like 800 million Aboriginal people had lived and died here. And as far as we're concerned, that establishes beyond all reasonable doubt prior occupancy, prior ownership of this country. And we now, after being invaded, after being subjected to the sort of massacres and brutality that continues in Australia today, we now say we want justice. We want land rights. Land rights is important for the survival of Aboriginal people. Land rights is vital for the survival of Aboriginal people. We're not going to go, we're not far around.
Quick, the balloon's going.
I think the whole thing about it was the spontaneity and the way that people stepped forward and contributed resources, time, energy, and just by taking part in the activities here, being part of the group, I think it helped make the group function a lot easier and made the whole protest campaign a lot more successful It was a fairly total experience from the black community in Brisbane and from interstate.
The steelworkers also are facing the sack. Join together our forces. Put BHP on the rack. We must take some action and jobs we all need and stop this big company raping Australia for greed. So workers of Wollongong, we must all unite. Back up 31 miners for showing some fight. Go Beauty, yeah! One cup! We're on cup! We're on cup! We're on cup! We're on cup!
I do apologise, I am a POM who is down here poking his nose in. Already you've got maximum coverage in the British newspapers. There's coverage. There's coverage in European newspapers, and you've had maximum coverage on British television with pictures of you on the blockade. The only law that I and you are breaking is a law of convenience set up here by the local government, and I hope by me getting arrested on Monday, that will bring just a little bit of attention across the world to what you're doing. The Australian arc sits astride the Tropic of Capricorn, basking in a hot, dry climate, all except the extreme corners, where Tasmania boasts the coolest, wettest climate of all. And that's what southwest Tasmania is all about. This stuff, rain, 160 inches, 4,000 millimetres, it falling on almost every day of the year. Add that to a temperate climate and the plant can grow throughout the annual cycle. Now, conditions like this existed in a broad band round the earth some 40 million years ago, and that's when the wonderful temperate rainforests came into existence. And because of this wet climate, they've remained untouched by the ravages of fire ever since. So why did man leave these rich hunting grounds all that time ago? Well, we don't really know, because the deposits in the caves just haven't been studied in sufficient detail. But it seems safe to conclude that as the glaciers began to melt and this rainforest reasserted itself, life round here became just too difficult. A botanic garden without equal, protected by the rain and this horizontal scrub, and I can tell you, this is the real reason why it's remained almost untouched since the first Tasmanian gave up the unequal struggle. The dam site just around the corner. All beyond that will be flooded forever, and that includes those archaeological treasures of Kutakina Caves. Bearing in mind the fears of the local people, I feel compelled to take a stand for preservation of this World Heritage Area. I swear the Franklin is the face of things is gone. I I have never ever broken the law before, but I'm going to break the law for the first time on Monday, and I'm going to do it with a smile on my face. If we don't win this fight, then Australia will be seen across the world as breaking an international agreement. Who's making the major diversion?
There'll be some musicians and guitarists on that great big fishing trawler that's going to float down and just hang around.
A government spokesman said today that British botanist David Bellamy should keep out of Tasmanian affairs. He was commenting on Professor Bellamy's association with Franklin River dam protesters.
Hydroelectric Commission, you're trespassing on that land. A hydro representative has requested my assistance to remove you from the land. If you don't remove immediately, you will be arrested.
You may do that.
Reason why you cannot be moved?
No reason at all why I can't be moved.
You are under arrest.
Thank you.
After my arrest, I was charged at Queenstown, refused bail, which forbade me to enter the HEC property again, and was jailed, along with 32 other blockaders. A hollow hewn pine, perhaps 1,800 years old. And look what they've done. They've gone and cut through its protective bark just to mark the edge, the boundary of the land of the Hydroelectricity Commission. And if I could go in there, which I can't, I could show you a much, much larger tree, which is perhaps 3,000 years of age, putting it amongst the oldest things upon this earth. This is the king of the forest. We're here fighting for a new Bill of Rights for all future generations of humankind and all the plants and animals with which we share this planet. A new ethic for civilization, no less.
Friends, I'd just like to say that the Building Workers Industrial Union has a long association with the ideals that Paul Robeson stood for during his lifetime. That's why the BWIU is very, very pleased to be the promoters of this show.
I'm on my journey now. Woo! Mount Zion. I'm on my journey now. Yeah. Mount Zion. And I wouldn't take it nothing. Mount Zion. I'm on the journey now. Mount Zion. Mount Zion. Mount Zion.
Been a fan of Paul Robeson's for many, many years. In fact, I was lucky enough to be one of those people who saw him on his last international tour, which was to Australia in 1960. I was still a schoolgirl, I hasten to add.
And this is one about Joe Hill, one of our great heroes in the American working class movement. They framed him on a murder charge, but his spirit still lives in the hearts of all the American working class. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
Times I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost
Came here for this Planet Hollywood opening. Yeah, as part of that. But I knew that just was a pretense so I can go and spend time. So when people asked me, they kept asking me the first 2 days, how did I like Australia? And I said, well, let me reserve my comments until I come where I need to come, and that was here. And I knew I needed to come here. That's all my wife and I talked about, was coming to this community. Because of our life and what we've been involved in, I guess all of our lives, all of our adult life, is our relationship with the community. We live in San Francisco. The community I live in now is a community I've lived in since I was 10 years old. So I live in the same community I grew up in. So the issues that we deal with in our life and in our community are some of the same issues that you deal with here. You know, the lack of opportunities, the situation with police brutality, the situation with young kids, particularly young black kids in the United States. Same thing you deal with. We have nephews. I have nephews, and my nephews have been the nephews who've been in trouble, with 20 years old now, and trying to find answers. We're trying to find answers. How can we bring them to a point where they begin to, understand what's happening to them, and understand there's a dead-end road for them, understand that, but at the same time elevate themselves and lift themselves above that and say, hey, I care enough about myself, I care enough about my responsibility, and I'm not supposed to be taking drugs, I'm not supposed to be selling drugs in the community, and that I'm a part of this community, and if I don't act in accordance to those laws in the community, then the community diminishes, the community falls apart.
We're going through the same thing ourselves. We lost a son in 1981.
Yeah.
You know, we suffered all the way through, right up until now. We still having trouble with the police and the white Australians. You know, and that pain will never go away, you know, even when we get justice for our son, you know.
Yeah. You fight for not only your son, you're fighting for those others.
We're fighting for all of Australia.
George too, man. You know, because I didn't know what I was getting to. I didn't know whether somebody was going to take me. Because the first thing they told me at the hotel when I said, well, I want to go to the Aboriginal community, they kind of looked at me real strange. And so they said, well, you don't want to. One of the guys said, well, you don't want to go down there, because I said, well, here, that's exactly where I want to go. The place where you say I don't want to go, that's exactly where I want to go.
This one up here that's your polyvisco, that's Tetron. That's all your polyvisco stuff. And this one's the most important one. This was a police shooting. The government don't know where they're going to get this weaved in future, because actually we were the only ones that were weaving it in Australia.
This question about national textile. We've been around this trap before, over Oakdale, and let's not kid ourselves.
Well, it was John Howard's battlers who carried him to victory, but now he's facing a major challenge to keep faith with those workers who increasingly find themselves out of work as these companies go belly up, as they say in the vernacular.
Remember what I said yesterday. When you start denying workers their annual leave loading, long service leave and superannuation entitlements, that is theft.
We got the first letter on the Thursday, which would have been January the 14th. And everybody thought, this is a bit strange, they're giving us an extra week's holiday.
So, okay, we'll wear that. The alarm bell started to ring a little bit.
And then when the second letter came the following Thursday to tell us about the mass meeting, and of course it had been leaked to the media, by the time we came in here on the Friday morning, it was pretty certain that we were going to close.
In the meantime, we'd been contacted officially by the Human Resources Manager to set up a meeting with the union in Sydney, at which they announced that both National Textiles and National Bartex down here in Sydney were going to close.
I had been in contact with the union, being a shop steward, and I did know on the Thursday night before we come out here on the Friday that was the case, that National Textiles was gone, and so was everybody's job.
Nobody had any money. It was straight after the Christmas holidays. Everybody had bills. They were expecting to go back to work.
Bought things and spent most of them expecting to come back to work, and pay the bills.
If that wasn't bad enough, they also told us that there wasn't enough money to pay their full entitlements.
People that had given their lives to the National Textiles, they couldn't believe that this is what was really happening.
Within the first 12 hours, we were set up, we had the gates blocked, and it went on from there.
They threw out the picket line and decided not to let anything out of that factory until they received 100 cents in the dollar. This is despite the urging of the administrator, the managing director, and also representatives of the government, the federal government, to actually accept the deal that was being offered, which was the 60 cents in the dollar over approximately 2 years.
Company directors may have to personally pay workers' entitlements under the federal government's plan for dealing with collapsed companies. The new legislation will mean the buck stops with the bosses if it's found they deliberately tried to avoid their commitments.
If you adopt a situation where directors are personally liable for company debts, you would have no directors.
Now the lessons of the past were all learned in workers' blood. Mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities and the farmlands to trenches full of mud. War's always been the boss's way, sir. The union forever defending our rights. Down with the black leg, the workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters in many far-off lands. There is power in a union.
It's been revealed that while workers were tightening their belts to protect the company last year, executives were granting themselves hefty pay rises.
Fueling workers' fire, revelations from last year's annual report that 2 company directors shared in a $103,000 pay rise.
It's only us that keep them in their business. It's only the working class that make their money for them.
National Textiles CEO Derek Hodge accepted a $30,000 bonus, a 10% pay rise on top of his 6-figure salary.
We raised it with Derek Hodge. Would you donate this back to the workers? And the answer was a flat no.
We don't want a partial vindication, we want a full vindication. We've done nothing wrong.
Now I long for the morning that they realize brutality and unjust cannot defeat us. But who'll defend the workers who cannot organize? When the bosses send their lackeys out to cheat us.
With people like Healy in your background, followed by Fitzgibbons, who did a remarkable job for us in leading us through that period where we made incredible gains, cementing them in place for workers all over Australia. And then alongside him was a bloke called Norm Docker, who on his retirement was described by Sir John Moore as being the greatest advocate the trade union movement ever produced. To be followed by Tas Ball, which brings me to the international position, because amongst a lot of other things, Tas Ball is a great internationalist. And it was he, more than anyone else, who educated us and positioned us for the trade union support that we received internationally. He was a great advocate of the International Transport Workers Federation and the position of solidarity around the world. And I've got absolutely no doubt that it was the work that he did and that I attempted to actually follow on and build on, which enabled us to call in the ILWU and the International Transport Workers Federation and all of their affiliates to threaten this government and this employer with international solidarity. And that wouldn't have happened without the heritage that was available for us to take advantage of, put in place by people like Healy and Docker and Fitzgibbons and Tas Ball, and the seafarers, of course, and through their leadership, offered us the same opportunity. But I, speaking from my experience, having worked with all of those people, with the exception, of course, of Healy, it was a wonderful inheritance in this union, and it virtually ensured that irrespective of the challenge, you couldn't possibly fail. You couldn't possibly fail. You know, the first problem we had to contend with in that dispute was the fact that various courts around the country ruled us ineligible to be there as leaders, and that presented a very significant problem, particularly, you know, given the level of leadership that was required for the rank and file. And people filled in for us and took over developed a roster actually in many ports where we had trade union leaders taking over for us and doing our job. And I suspect that was quite significant in terms of the way that we actually got the trade union movement behind us, because we introduced them to the dispute very early because of the need for people to take our running in terms of leadership. Their rank and file followed, and we had such magnificent support. There was various stages that we reached that were highlights, although, as I said at the time, on each occasion we got a victory in the court, there was always another bitter pill to swallow. And our first 3 or 4 victories in the courts were all stood aside whilst the appeal process was followed through. But when we look back on them now, and you put them in perspective, they were all highlights, of course. They were all steps in the stage of overturning the actions of the federal government and Patrick's. And then ultimately, I suppose, to have the privilege of being present and asked to be the first to walk through the gate in the company of my wife, Gwen, on the day that we achieved occupation again of the waterfront, is a moment that I'll never ever forget. That was the very first time that I accepted that they could do no more to us, and that we were back, and that we were back inside, and that whatever followed on from that would be able to be improved upon, and perhaps never again in our lifetime would a government and an employer think that they could destroy a union by the use of mercenaries and dogs and chains and balaclavas to remove a legitimate workforce in this country. And so when you look back, this wasn't always evident during the dispute because you had no time to analyse these things. But when you look back, there was a huge swing in support for our position. And that's something that they can never change, irrespective of how many years pass or how many people try. It was the day that the trade union movement stood up, headed by the ACTU and people like Bill Kelty and Greg Combay, and behind them formed this huge battalion of support from academics, from so-called, a term I don't like using, ordinary Australians, who came down in their thousands and donated thousands of dollars to the campaign. And we got such international support. It was measured so important that Reith and Howard threatened to apply the Crimes Act against me and the union because of our capacity to solicit international support. But that's a measurement of how concerned they were at our capacity to get that support. And we got that support because of the heritage that the Maritime Union of Australia enjoyed. Its position, Tasbull made the Waterside Workers Federation the best known dockers union in the world. We had supported a lot of campaigns around the world. And when we wanted support, they came and supported us. And that's true internationalism.